and welcome back to this next in the series where we're looking at some savate. Last week we were talking about musette, one of the really core techniques we use, which I think actually is the French for kind of nose bag or nose feed, like on a horse. I think it's this idea where, sorry, I'm just going to grab Michael here and start hitting him even earlier than I was planning to. This idea of if I'm hitting him here, I'm almost putting a nose bag on him, which is I think where that musette term comes from. But today we're going to talk about a completely different technique. We're going to talk about BAF, which is very close to our hearts because many years after deciding to call ourselves BAF as a club, we came across this technique, so it actually exists in one of the things we do. So this is BAF teaching you about BAF. So this technique, rather than a musette, which was a very linear technique, yeah, my hands are going in a straight line from my guard to my opponent. Very much as we would think about in modern boxing, being a straight and a cross, those kind of linear motions. So BAF is much more of a circular motion, much more like a hook. But more unlike a kind of modern boxing hook, where I want to get in really close and drive my hip across, this time I actually want to use a full extension of my arm. So rather than thinking about it, when I start thinking about doing a boxing hook, I kind of get into position and make everything solid and then drive with that back leg and the hip to supply the power, but all of my arm really stays rigid to push that power in. The difference with BAF is I want to more imagine my hand is a rock and my arm is a piece of rope, and I'm literally just going to lob the rock into his face. So rather than this rigid thing, it becomes quite a almost floppy kind of arm throw that I'm going to do. So rather than, as I said, solid in here, it's really kind of flowing. So I'm going to drop the arm down to our hip and come round and through my opponent's head, driving with that hip across my body at the point of impact to add the extra power on there. So when I'm actually aiming this, I'm coming in, my hand goes down, round, and into the side of my opponent. And ideally what I'm looking to do is cut my hand just a little bit and land it right over my opponent's ear, ideally bursting the eardrum. That's the way it's originally taught, so that I can step in, clear a guard, smack, and land my hit here, driving it right the way through with my hip. So again, it's quite a solid hit. I'm moving the head and therefore disabling my opponent and knocking them about a bit. So if Michael's got a guard up, I can come in with something like a musette to clear the line, and then follow that with my BAF, provided he's not tall enough that my arm hits his shoulder rather than his head. Which is not Michael's fault, it's my fault for not putting stilettos on today. So, musette comes in there, BAF then comes in around the head. You can't deliver it from the front arm, where I'm just going to do a smaller circle, but I really have to rely on driving with my hip for that one. This one, I've got quite a lot of motion. If I'm just here, there's very little on my arm, so it all has to come from my hip to drive that hip across. So that's BAF, and you can target it to other places because it's, whilst obviously the ear is the most devastating, if I can land that slightly, sorry, if I do it from the other side, it'll be easier to see. No, just from there. If I land with the thumb just on the jaw and snap that across, I've got a good chance of dislocating the jaw. And all of these provide what we would call head wibble. So the head snaps one way and snaps back again, and that makes your brain go, and hopefully just then my opponent falls over with a short-term blackout, and that gives me the opportunity to either make good escape or to incapacitate them whilst they're already slightly incapacitated. So that's kind of how BAF works. As we do with all of these techniques, we look at being able to deliver them with a closed hand as well. So when I'm delivering this with a closed fist, I'm still doing that same motion, that long arm throw, but now I'm going to hit with the top of my hand here. And the way I always think about this, if I was holding a knife, I basically want to stick the knife in one ear so it comes out the other. Across here. Again, I can get a really solid hit in connection with that, and I can vary that. That can come in at the chin if my opponent has their guard up. I can even use that in getting round into kind of kidneys, or if I'm stepping off with a kind of décollage technique, I can just ram that into the ribs or into the stomach if my opponent is a bit taller than me. So it's quite a versatile attack and gives us something that kind of comes in round the side rather than just the linear moveset we looked at last week. So that gives us kind of what I would class as a linear and a circular. And next time we're going to have a look at la tranche, which is a kind of downwards crushing motion where I'm trying to make my opponent literally sit on the ground in front of me. But we'll cover that next time. So hopefully you found that interesting, and I'll catch up with you next week.